So welcome all. It's a great pleasure to welcome NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to Sweden, and especially welcome here at Harpsund. And I know you have been here before in your capacity as Prime Minister of Norway, so welcome back. During the government's meeting and our working lunch, we've had the opportunity to discuss Sweden's NATO application, Russia's illegal aggression against Ukraine, and the security situation in Europe. And first, I want to thank you for your strong support for Sweden's application for NATO membership and for your solid partnership in these challenging times. Russia's illegal and brutal invasion of Ukraine was a watershed moment for Sweden and for Europe. It changed our security situation, and after a careful analysis process with the parties in Parliament, my government, with broad parliamentary support, decided that Sweden should apply for NATO membership. The historical significance of this decision is obvious. Ending 200 years of military non-alignment is not to be done without careful consideration. But my lodestar as Prime Minister during this process is what course of action is best serving Sweden's security. And I am convinced that this is the right decision. And the fact that Sweden and Finland are applying for membership simultaneously will reinforce the security for both of us, for the Baltic Sea region, for Europe, and for NATO. And as you know, Turkey has raised concern in relations to Sweden's and Finland's applications, and we are taking them very seriously and have engaged in a dialogue together with Finland in order to find a way forward with Turkey. I warmly welcome the facilitating role played by you, Mr. Secretary General, and my ambition is that we should have these matters resolved. We have a lot to offer to NATO and its members. Both Sweden and Finland will be security providers for the region and for the entire NATO, including Turkey. That will also be my main message when I attend the NATO summit in Madrid at the end of this month. Sweden will recognize the security challenges of the alliance and be an active and constructive member. And I also want to thank you for the strong political support expressed in many different ways and by an overwhelming majority of NATO allies. In today's meeting, I also underlined the importance of for Sweden to continue our engagement for disarmament, and the Norwegian policy is of importance with acceptance of nuclear deterrence in combination with a continued engagement for disarmament. And Sweden's strong international voice will remain. On Ukraine, the full-scale and brutal aggression by Russia has been met with incredible bravery from Ukrainians and their leaders, and by a forceful response from the entire transatlantic community and beyond. And that's truly remarkable in such difficult times. And our support will continue. Last week, my government decided on further military and financial support to Ukraine. In total, this package amounts to a value of more than 95 million euros. And it will strengthen Ukraine's capabilities at a critical time. So once again, thank you, Jens, for your visit. It sends a strong signal of support and unity. Please, the floor is yours.
Prime Minister Andersson, kjære Magdalena, it's great to be back at Harpsund. Great to see you, and thank you for this warm welcome. Sweden is NATO's neighbor and our close friend. We share the same values, we share the same neighborhood, and we share the same challenges from Russia's aggressive actions to terrorism and the security consequences of climate change. So I warmly welcome the sovereign decision by Sweden and Finland to apply for NATO membership. This is a historic step at a critical time for our security. It is clear that Sweden and Finland's membership in NATO would boost transatlantic security. It will enable closer Nordic and closer Baltic defense cooperation, and it will strengthen the alliance's presence in the high north. At the same time, we have to address the security concerns of all allies. And as you mentioned, Turkey has raised some concerns, including Turkey's fight against PKK, a group proscribed as a terrorist organization by NATO allies, the EU, and also by Sweden. So I remain in close contact with you, Magdalena, and your colleagues, as well as with Finland and our ally Turkey, about the way ahead. My staff also remain in close dialogue with officials from all three countries in order to address the Turkish concerns swiftly and move forward on Swedish and Finnish accessions to the alliance. I'm glad that you, Prime Minister, confirmed the Swedish government's readiness to address Turkey's concerns as part of assuming the obligations of future NATO membership. I welcome that Sweden has already started to change its counter-terrorism legislation, and that Sweden will ensure that the legal framework for arms export will reflect their future status as a NATO member with new commitments to allies. These are two important steps to address concerns Turkey has raised. Prime Minister Andersson, Sweden and Finland's security matters for NATO, and many allies have made clear assurances and commitments to your security. NATO remains vigilant, and we have increased our presence in the region, including with more exercises. As we speak, Baltops, our largest exercise in the Baltic Sea, is underway. This year it's actually hosted by Sweden and marking the 500th anniversary of the Swedish Navy. It includes over 7,000 forces from 14 NATO allies, as well as Sweden and Finland, all training side by side. Sweden and Finland are also participating in NATO's integrated air and missile defense exercise across the Baltic region and Poland. Let me thank you for Sweden's valuable contributions to NATO missions and exercises. I'm always impressed by the professionalism and dedication of the Swedish forces. So, Prime Minister, thank you for your strong personal leadership, your political vision and your determination, and for Sweden's significant contributions to Euro-Atlantic security. I look forward to welcoming you to the NATO summit in Madrid later this month.
Johannes Ledel, AFP. I have a question, one question each for you. Prime Minister Andersson, I was wondering, out of the sort of concrete demands that have been circulated from Turkey, such as extraditions, are there any of those demands that we've seen that Sweden is willing to agree to? And I was also wondering, Mr. Stoltenberg, if you could maybe ask, if Sweden and Turkey would not be able to reach an agreement on these demands, what can NATO and other NATO members offer Turkey as recompense?
We take the Turkish concerns very seriously and all their issues, and not at least their security concerns when it comes to the fight against terrorism. And we have a bilateral and trilateral dialogue with Turkey ongoing right now, and we will, of course, very clearly state how we are working against terrorism and how we are fighting against terrorism. we have changed our laws during the last years and have a much stronger legislation in the fight against terrorism than we had before. And also during my years as Minister of Finance, we have a much stricter regulation when it comes to financing of terrorism, and will also the 1st of July have even stronger legislation when it comes to the fight against terrorism. So here there are no questions about how strongly Sweden sees on terrorism, and that we are willing to contribute to the fight against terrorism. When it comes to the question of arms export, if you listen to the declaration that the foreign minister had last week in Parliament, you can also see that as a member of NATO, the current legislation we have might make the decisions that independent agency might view it differently.
Let me first just say that I welcome very much these clear messages, signals from the Swedish government, both on terrorism and on arms exports. Then on your question on what do we do in the meantime until we find an agreement on the concerns that Turkey has raised. So first of all, the aim is to solve those issues as soon as possible, to be able to welcome Finland and Sweden as full members as soon as possible. And therefore, we are working hard and actively on these issues in close consultation with Stockholm, with Helsinki, and of course our NATO allied Turkey. And in that context, those signals from Sweden are important on terrorism and arms exports. Second, I think we have to understand that Sweden is in a better place now than it was before it applied. Seen from a security perspective, of course, the fact that Sweden made that historic decision, that then NATO allies responded by partly making it clear that many NATO allies have already issued security assurances to Sweden. The United Kingdom, actually here at Harpsund, the United States and other allies. That makes a difference, and not least because also NATO has stepped up its presence with more exercises, with more presence in the region, air, sea, land, and that makes a difference, meaning that if Sweden was attacked, then I deem it as unthinkable that NATO allies would not react. And that is a message that we have conveyed, the NATO allies have conveyed in a very clear way to any potential adversary. So seen from a security perspective, Sweden is in a better place now than before they applied. Then of course the aim is to of course take the next step, full membership, as soon as possible, but then we need to address the concerns expressed by Turkey.
Andreas Öbrink, Swedish television. A question for Mr. Stoltenberg. When do you expect that Sweden and Finland might get a green light and proceed in the applications for membership status? By the Madrid summit in late June, by the Swedish elections in mid-September, or by the Turkish elections next spring? And if you please, Mrs. Anderson, the adjustments you mentioned in the foreign policy declaration last week about fight against terrorism, new terrorism legislation, is this to be seen as a direct answer to the Turkish concerns?
Well, first on the issue of when, as soon as possible, and that's the reason why we're working so hard. But of course, when several nations are involved in those talks, there's no way to say exactly when we will be able to solve and find a joint way to move forward on those issues. Our aim is to make it to find a solution as soon as possible, and because I think that the historic decision of Sweden to apply for membership was the right decision at the right time. It's good for Sweden, it's good for Europe, it's good for NATO, and it's good for transatlantic unity, and therefore I do whatever I can to make sure that we are able to welcome Finland and Sweden as soon as possible.
Well, I mean, the reason that we had a new declaration is because we have applied to as a member, and for membership in NATO. I mean, that's the reason why we had it in the first place, and of course this also has raised concern with among some member states, and then it was relevant to also address, for instance, that we are very firm in our fight against terrorism.
Thank you. Alf Jonsen from VG in Oslo. I'd like to challenge your answer, as soon as possible. Is there a timetable now for a further process? Are there scheduled meetings the next days? Countries combined or the other forms? Is it possible to start the formal accession for Sweden and Finland before the summit in Madrid? And if I may, can this internal deadlock spill up an impression that NATO is not as united as you want it to appear? Thank you.
As the Madrid summit was never a deadline, but at the same time we are working to find a solution as soon as possible. But when many countries or several countries are involved, there is no way to say exactly when these countries are going to be able to agree. But let me also then add that that's also the reason why it is so important that in the meantime we have agreed both to step up. We see NATO allies have provided substantial security assurances to Sweden, and NATO has stepped up its presence in this region. So it's not like nothing has happened, and these assurances and this presence matters. And of course then I hope that can be replaced with a more formalized full-fledged membership as soon as possible.
I'd also like to really underline how important these assurances and also the presence is for us here in Sweden. It was absolutely fundamental for our decision to join NATO, and of course this is very useful in this situation.
Pontus Mattsson, Swedish Radio. Mr. Stoltenberg, what do you think that Sweden should do to meet the Turkish concerns? You talked the cell weapon, for example. You touched it a little bit. Could you please explain some more?
Well, there are now talks going on in different formats, in different ways between Sweden, Finland, Turkey, and NATO. I don't think it will be helpful if I go into the details of those talks, but I can just say that the messages, the signals that Sweden has provided over the last days, and with the statement in the Parliament last week, and also by the Prime Minister now, they are helpful, and they indicate that Sweden, as Finland, are ready to, in a concrete way, address concerns related to terrorism. That Sweden, of course, fights terrorism and is ready to cooperate with all the NATO allies in fighting terrorism. And on arms exports, again, I welcome the signals. The details, I think, has to be sorted out in the talks. But in general, I will just say that we are stronger when we stand together, and that's exactly why we have NATO. NATO solidarity, and of course by joining NATO, Sweden will get the formalized treaty security guarantees, our collective defense guarantees. At the same time, Sweden will take on, as all the other members, take on the responsibilities and obligations being a NATO ally. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.